Hello, everyone. Welcome to Grid Live Wrap-Up. Joe San Diego here along with Kobe Lambert from the Podium Finish. We have Alex Anderson from the Gay Racing Podcast and Isha Azim from Racing with Isha. A big thank you to all our Patreon investors calling the show, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew, our newest one. You too can invest in the Grid Network through Patreon. Link in the video description. And of course, buy me a coffee or the YouTube super chat if you're watching us live. If you're not watching us live, you'll see the YouTube thanks button. You can buy a cup of coffee or a YouTube support for us here at the Grid Network or for any one of our on-team members. Everyone here at the Grid Network, we do this for you, the viewers, the fans of motorsports, because we all love this. Show your support for everyone here. Alex, we got to start with you. Formula One. This was a weekend for Verstappen. He'll remember, but I feel like this could have been a weekend maybe would have probably forgotten, but it seemed to have turned out for the best.
Yeah, that's right, Joe. The Qatar Grand Prix started with the three-time Formula One World Drivers' Champion starting on the pole. Max Verstappen clinched the championship during the sprint race, but the story on the first lap and first corner of today's race belonged to Mercedes. After several close calls in Japan, the two finally made contact. George Russell was right behind Verstappen and on medium tires, while Lewis Hamilton was on soft tires. Hamilton got right up alongside Russell and fell back a bit before turn 1. Then entering turn 1, Hamilton lunged forward and his right rear tire made big contact on Russell's front left tire. Both of them went spinning. The wheel came off of Lewis Hamilton's car and he was beached in the Qatar sand and done for the day. George Russell continued and finished 4th. So, Isha, let's start with you for this first question. Does Mercedes need to intervene between these two drivers? They've had a lot of close calls, and today they finally made contact.
Yeah, Alex, I think that if in today's situation, had Lewis Hamilton's mistake cost George Russell a bigger loss, like say he would have been out of the race too, or he would have dropped really, really far down the grid, I think that in that case, Mercedes would have had to intervene with them and, have a conversation discussing what's going on. But seeing how George Russell was able to finish 4th, I think that just looking at today's race, it's not that big of a problem because Lewis Hamilton's mistake mostly just affected him, and he took full responsibility of it afterwards when he realized, when he saw the recap and saw that it was just his fault. But since you also brought up Japan, looking at Japan and then the race before that, Singapore as well, where we did see some a little bit of a fight going on between them. And as you mentioned in Japan too, I think that there is some sort of, to a certain degree at least, some animosity going on between the drivers. And I think that Mercedes might have to have a conversation with them to calm down. Just looking at today's race, I think it's okay. But when we're also bringing in Japan into this and then possibly Singapore as well, I think that they need to have some sort of conversation with their strategies and just going over what the drivers' communication is like, because I think that at this point the drivers need to communicate with each other more than the team principal or the engineers have to with them.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Isha. I don't think Mercedes needs to intervene at this point. It's not like, there's a championship on the line since Max Verstappen's already clinched that. Obviously, there was no way no other driver was going to be able to challenge him this year. And this obviously doesn't rise to the level of Hamilton and Rosberg quite a handful of years ago either. This is what happens, when you have two number one drivers in Hamilton and Russell. Both of them, they want to be that top dog on the team. They want to get the best strategy, the best of everything. And unfortunately, when you have two very hungry and competitive drivers like this, these type of things happen. And as you mentioned, Isha, it's really great to see Lewis Hamilton watch the replay and take full responsibility for this. I know it's kind of rare nowadays for people to take accountability for their actions. So really great to see Lewis do that. And if you go to Mercedes social media page, they showed Lewis and George hugging it out at the end. So with those two drivers being great professionals, I'm sure they're going to move on from this incident. But after seeing them coming together on the track, last few races and all of that, I think it's a great idea for Mercedes to sit down with both drivers and to remind them what's at stake here and just go out there and try to do what's best for the team, because contact is the last thing, any team needs.
And now another team that might have some teammate issues is Red Bull. So Sergio Perez, he crashed out in the sprint race, which is what assured Max Verstappen his third championship. Perez in the pit lane and struggled with track limits penalties. And he finished where penalties were handed out, and on a day when Hamilton scored no points, but Hamilton's teammate Russell still finished fourth. At the end of nine, Perez and came through to a fourth place finish. So we know AlphaTauri and Red Bull have their lineup set for 2024, but if it had to be finalized today, would Red Bull consider a swap and bring in Liam Lawson into the picture with AlphaTauri and Red Bull to maybe replace Sergio Perez? What do you think, Kobe?
To be honest, I think Sergio Perez is broken right now, and they don't know how to fix him, and he doesn't know how to fix himself either. I just can't explain it. With the type of car that Sergio Perez has under him, I really think that he should be running a lot better than what we've seen from him this season, because there's no excuse for him not to be finishing at least in the top five bare minimum most weekends, instead of having all these troubles, all these mistakes and incidents. And in other cases, if a driver made this many mistakes, they would be out of Formula One by now. And as we've seen in other cases with contracts and stuff, contracts don't really mean a lot of things. So I would actually not be surprised if Red Bull decided to call an audible and tell Liam Lawson, hey, Liam, you know how you were just going to be a test driver for Red Bull in 2024? Well, you're going to be going to AlphaTauri instead, and you're going to have that race seat, and Daniel Ricciardo is going to be going up to Red Bull, and Sergio Perez is going to be dropped. It would not surprise me if that scenario happens at all. I don't think it would be a good idea for them to, put Liam Lawson alongside Max Verstappen at first, because I think if you set up a rookie driver alongside a driver like Verstappen, you're basically going to set him up for failure, especially if Max completely destroys him in terms of the head-to-head competition within the team, as we've seen with Perez and Verstappen. So yeah, it would not surprise me at all if the Red Bull AlphaTauri seats for 2024 still aren't settled by now.
Yeah, I agree with Kobe here. I think that if the seats are set right now the way they are, if we're talking about them being finalized today, I think that the AlphaTauri seats are set. Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda, I think they're a good pairing, and I don't think that the team's going to be trying to change them. However, the problem is Red Bull needs to find someone who is on par with Max Verstappen, and I think that Sergio Perez, the pressure's just really gotten to him at this point, and as Kobe mentioned, there's nobody knows how to fix him right now, and it's not like a 1, 2, 3 race sort of thing, or it's not a thing where you're a rookie and you're just sort of trying to break into the field. He is a seasoned driver, and the mistakes that he's making at this point, as Kobe said, if it was any other driver, they would have definitely kicked him off the team. So I think that if Red Bull's looking towards Liam Lawson, it wouldn't be any sort of surprise, especially considering Red Bull's track record bringing in young, raw talent and then, turning them into world champions like we have with Max Verstappen. So I think that it's actually very likely that we could see Liam Lawson replacing Sergio Perez next season. But I think that either way, it is going to come with a sort of risk and a gamble, whether they decide to go with Checo or Liam Lawson, because Checo, they've seen him struggling this season. He's had a lot of mistakes. But with Liam Lawson, we've seen some great results from him. But once again, it's a gamble either way.
And now on yesterday's show, we discussed a tire situation that the FIA and F1 are facing. This morning, it was confirmed that mandatory pit stops would occur after 15 laps. We saw the undercut was pivotal in track position as the cars pitted during the first pit stop were up front. Fernando Alonso gained and passed Charles Leclerc, and in the end, McLaren did not care about the tires, and Piastri had the fastest lap several times. So Isha, were you surprised by the racing product we had? FIA and F1 make the best of what they could out of what could have been a disaster situation?
Alex, I was surprised by the racing product we saw today, but not necessarily in a positive way. I think the main positive that came out of today's race was that we didn't see any major crashes. I mean, besides the first one that happened with Lewis Hamilton, but it was a sort of safer crash where nothing big catastrophic happened. But I feel like the FIA and Formula One did make the best of what could have been a more disastrous situation, because yesterday, when everything was still uncertain, we were throwing around different ideas on the show of whether they would put out regulations, safety cars, whatever. But I think that overall, the race ended well. It could have been much, much worse, but thankfully it wasn't. Overall, though, I feel like today's race wasn't as amazing as we've seen the past few races being, and I think that was mostly because of the tire issues that we've seen this weekend.
Yeah, with Max Verstappen dominating much of the season, we haven't really seen, a plethora of amazing racing moments throughout this season. But yeah, I think they made the best of the situation today in the Qatar Grand Prix. We're really glad we didn't see any major tire blowouts in this race be compared to, some of the darkest Formula One races in the past, like the United States Grand Prix from the 2000s. Definitely don't want to go there again. But yeah, crisis averted. We're really glad we got through the Qatar Grand Prix, and next going to move on to the next race.
Now, this weekend really seemed like a weekend of attrition, as only 19 cars started, as Carlos Sainz's car had a fuel leak issue before the start of the race. He didn't even get to start. And Lewis Hamilton was out on lap 1, as we talked about earlier. And there were hot temperatures, high humidity, and drivers complaining about the conditions. You had Logan Sargent retire on lap 42 because he wasn't feeling well. And that video, when he got out of the car, he just looked very unwell. I hope he's okay right now. And George Russell tried to get air into the car by steering with the wrist. And multiple drivers were lifting their visors a crack to deal with the heat. So Kobe, since almost everyone is pushing the tires to the limits, did this add to this intensity for the drivers?
Oh yeah, definitely. The heat in the Middle East is no joke. It was definitely quite a physically demanding race for all the drivers, even the drivers on the grid who take their conditioning really serious. I mean, in order to be in Formula One, you really do have to take it seriously. But even the drivers, who train so hard each week, to be prepared for scenarios like this, they were completely drained at the end of this race. Yeah, handling a Formula One car at these speeds on a track like this, in these conditions with the tires was hard enough, but when you add heat into the equation, it gets far more difficult. And the situation with Logan Sargent, I was actually very concerned about him, listening to him on the radio, sending a faint voice, didn't know if he could make it, wasn't feeling well, and then seeing how he was swerving on the track, and I'm thinking this guy really needs to get off the track because he's a danger to himself and everyone else out there. So I'm really glad that Williams was able to encourage him to say, you don't have to do this if you're not feeling well. It's okay to come in and retire the car. And understand this was very hard for Logan Sargent to do. As we know, he's been under a lot of pressure with all of the mistakes he's been making on the track. He could be a one and done in Formula One and needing to hit several targets that the team wants him to make before the end of the season. And then you feel like you can't make it to the end of the race. I can't imagine how difficult that was for him to deal with mentally. And yeah, it was just really hard to see him in that condition. I was reading from the Williams website that Logan Sargent has been dealing with some flu-like symptoms. So when you're sick like that and you add on the heat, that's not a recipe for success at all. That's a complete disaster. And I'm sure he really felt like a bunch of crap today.
Yeah, Kobe and Alex, I agree with everything you guys have just said, but the only thing I'm going to add is that, the real evidence of exactly how intense this race was on the drivers, I think happened after the race when they were supposed to be celebrating. Like, in the post-race interview, right after they've ended the Grand Prix, Lando Norris was being interviewed, and Oscar, having just finished second place, and having come from yesterday's win, he, instead of being super excited and bouncing around, he was just so exhausted. He was just sitting on the ground while Lando was being interviewed. And then afterwards, when they went into, I forget what the room is called, but I think the driver's rooms where Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, and Oscar Piastri were, there for the whole shot that the cameraman made in there. Oscar was just lying on the floor. Max was sitting on the floor. Lando was just so tired. And you can really, really see the toll that today's race took on the drivers. And that's not just because of the tires and the intensity, but also the weather is a big, big factor. But overall, I agree with everything you guys said. I think it was a very, very intense race for the drivers. And I think that those post-race interviews were the biggest evidence of that as well.
And now let's talk race. Oscar Piastri won that very convincingly. Reminder that he's a rookie. I still can't believe it. Today, he was second place ahead of Lando Norris. And the room that you call that the Max Verstappen podcast. I totally agree with what Joe is saying in our private chat here. And today, second place for Piastri, second place ahead of Lando Norris, and now something with McLaren. Lando has been with McLaren McLaren with Sainz, Ricciardo, and Piastri. Sainz got McLaren a podium before Norris, Ricciardo a win, and Piastri a sprint race win. Does it become a bit concerning for Lando if his rookie teammate begins to finish ahead more frequently? What do you think, Isha?
Alex, I think it's definitely going to be concerning for Lando at this point because the past driver pairings that you've mentioned with Sainz and Ricciardo, they were both the senior drivers in that partnership. And at this point, Lando's supposed to be the senior driver, even though he's only like a year older than Oscar. But the problem is that if the driver under you, Oscar in this case, the rookie as well, starts outperforming you, then people are going to start asking questions. And the problem is that they're both in the same car. They've both got the same upgrades, right? It's sort of like a Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen situation right now. It's obviously not to that degree, but it's the situation where you've got the same car, you've got the same upgrades, and then people are expecting you both to perform incredibly well. And obviously, Lando did finish third today. It's not like he was really far down the grid, but seeing how Oscar outperformed him yesterday and then once again today, I think that's definitely going to be concerning for him.
Yeah, but Lando Norris being the more experienced driver at McLaren, you think this will be Lando's team, but not so fast as Oscar Piastri, who's doing, things you would never expect a rookie to do in his very first season of Formula One. Been very impressed with Piastri. I think at some point in his career, he has the potential to become a world champion. And I could also say the same for Lando Norris, but right now, Oscar Piastri, it just seems like he just has that in him that he has that fight that he can muscle this car and do a lot of great things that a lot of us wouldn't expect him to do at this early stage in his career. And going into 2024, it's really great to see how McLaren has truly turned us around. When we were doing the Middle Eastern race at the beginning of the season, McLaren was like the worst team on the grid, and we're wondering what's going on with McLaren. Did they get this car completely wrong? And it's amazing. Now we're returning to the Middle Eastern races, and now McLaren, looks to be the second best team to Red Bull. And if they can continue to work on this car, get it much better over the offseason for 2024, maybe, just maybe, we can have a title fight on our hand between McLaren and Red Bull. Yeah, so next year's championship run won't be a complete domination by Max Verstappen. But to answer the question you asked, I think Lando certainly has to feel a little concerned when your rookie teammate is really showing you out right now.
Has been so impressive this year, I think. And we have a comment in the chat from Adam. Congrats to Oscar Piastri on the sprint race yesterday. What a way day in Australia. Yeah, with the Bathurst as well. We're going to talk about that here in a bit. But yeah, let's move on to NASCAR. Isha, will you take?
Yes, thank you, Alex. So, shifting gears over to NASCAR now. The Bank of America Roval 400 at Charlotte Motor Speedway saw the playoff field go from 12 to 8. Tyler Reddick and Bubba Wallace ended Stage 1 first and second place, gaining valuable points. Stage 2, Chase Elliott took the lead from Christopher Bell. Both of them pitted before the end of Stage 1. However, before Stage 2 ended, a caution just as Chase Elliott was coming onto the pit road. He didn't get in and was barely pulling out onto the track, but started Stage 3 way back. Kyle Busch was in a must-win situation. He started Stage 3 in the lead and came home in third. The winner, first of this year, AJ Allmendinger, is the first non-playoff driver to win. He was nowhere near mentioned on yesterday's show, and nobody picked him in the Pick a Winner segment either. It has been a rough 2023 season, and at least now he has a win. So Alex and Joe, are you guys shocked that Allmendinger put together a winning run today?
So I don't think I'm shocked. I didn't exactly see this coming, but it's just Allmendinger just hasn't really had it at all this year. So, I mean, I'm surprised. I don't know if I'm shocked by any means because I know he can do this. He's won a road course before. That's like his whole thing. And now he's won at this track, I believe, 4 years in a row, 3 in Xfinity, and now this year. I mean, I know he's good here, and I know he's good on road courses, but Kaulig and Allmendinger himself just been not there, not showing up. But like when he's up front, it's just like, oh yeah, I mean, I believe that's happening. But for the road course race for Allmendinger to show up at being the playoff race, that is pretty surprising when you think about it. This is a race in the playoffs where the guys who really need to advance, they're all up there. And usually the guy who's in second, who is Byron, who already has a win, playoffs weren't really impacted if Byron got another win, except for possibly getting 5 more points, which he did not get. But I don't know. Like, I think this is really, really fascinating that Allmendinger really picked up, and there's chatter like, is he going to come back next year in Cup or will he go to Xfinity? He told the media this week that he will win, but he'll do whatever Matt Kaulig wants him to do. So I think this is a good indication he'll probably be back next year.
It was funny. Yesterday, I was thinking, after we went off the air, we did not mention AJ Allmendinger not once on the program. And my thinking was, well, we've had so many road courses, and we've seen in the past where he's contended for the win. Things don't work out. A good example, Coda, when he was battling for the lead. Last lap got spun out when he was battling Bowman and Ross Chastain for the win. But this year just seems like that team has not been really anywhere much of a factor. Sometimes bad luck, just sometimes they just don't seem to be a presence at that race. Today, especially when he was battling Ty Gibbs, restart after restart after restart, and then Kyle Busch in a must-win situation, I just kept thinking at some point somebody's going to get the best of him, he's going to make a mistake, or somebody's not going to go to his team way, and then it's race over. So for me, I was surprised that AJ Allmendinger put together a solid, good run during the playoffs where we know all the other drivers, especially the playoff drivers, are really going out there trying to get as many stage points, wins as possible. To pull it off at Charlotte in front of the team too, because we know for all the teams, Charlotte is pretty much a home race. That has to be huge. And then the celebration we saw from him, teary-eyed, the raw emotion, it was just something where I think that just really spoke about, what he's been through this year. And for me, that's why it was a surprise to see him win. Is it shocking? I wouldn't call it exactly shocking just because we know they could put together a good race, especially on the road courses. He's one of the favorites traditionally.
Joe, as you mentioned, the raw emotion of AJ Allmendinger in victory lane truly demonstrated the joy of winning. Now, for 4 drivers, the agony of defeat, including Kyle Busch in a must-win situation, ended 2 positions short. Now, Kyle Busch has looked back positively on the season, and after the start of the year, looked to be on track for a big year. So do RCR and Kyle Busch look back on the season positively or as a missed opportunity? Joe, what do you think?
I think they have to look at this as progress. Yeah, there could have been the great opportunity of getting a win here this weekend, but AJ Allmendinger, William Byron, those two were going to be hard to beat, and it's just something where I felt like you can't beat up yourself for how the race worked out. The missed opportunity, Texas comes to mind, of course, crashing out. That really put them behind the ball, and I feel just about midway through the season, they were just not a factor in a lot of races. Occasionally, they were up towards the front, but it wasn't the kind that will see a driver like Kyle Busch and Richard Childress Racing go to the second round, third round of the playoffs. We know there was a lot of folks that anticipate Kyle Busch was going to be out after the first round of the playoffs. So overall, I think they have to see it as progress. Missed opportunities here and there, race by race, but work on those goals. Don't think of we dropped the ball, because at the end of the day, I know as people would say, he could have won the Daytona 500. There was no overtime rule. He had good number of wins. People were thinking this was going to be a bad move for his career, that he was going to be winless. But he silenced those people really quickly. At the end, I think for Richard Childress, they have to be good, because this is one of their Richard Childress' best playoff performances with Kyle Busch behind the wheel.
What's interesting with Kyle Busch is that his whole season kind of just flipped once the TV networks changed. Like when we went from Fox to NBC, that he just kind of vanished once NBC took over. And I don't know, it's interesting. I feel like they should be proud of this season because all in all, the 8 car did better this year than they did last year in the playoffs. I know last year was different circumstances and Reddick probably had more speed to advance. But still, they made it to the round of 12 last year. The 8 only made it to the round of 16. So overall, it's a positive. They improved over last year with a whole new driver. And Kyle Busch, he was with Joe Gibbs Racing since 2008. He had not been in a new environment since then. It's a whole new manufacturer that he hadn't been with since 2007. So I I feel like for Kyle Busch, this is all around a pretty positive year. Probably frustrated. He had a shot at advancing, probably getting to win. But I think he and the 8 team, they're going to come back stronger next year. They seem to have maybe picked a little steam back up after they lost some over summer. But if they can carry that momentum into next year, I think they'll be able to rebound pretty solidly.
And now, turning towards another driver, Bubba Wallace's playoff run ended, and it looked like he could potentially position himself late race to capitalize on the chaos. Now, the chaos being Suarez got into Cindric, who then got into Wallace and then spun him around. Wallace dropped from 11th to 31st place, which was a big drop, but then he pitted for new tires and was able to finish in 16th place. So, Alex, how was Bubba's first playoff appearance, and did he exceed your expectations?
He absolutely exceeded my expectations. I don't think my expectations were as low as I know a lot of people had him out in that first round. I had him making it to at least round. But like he almost won Texas. He very well was super close to advancing to the end of 8 in the first race of this round. But that didn't. And when it came to the Roval and he was in a rough point spot, I figured it was probably end of the road. But look, Bubba Wallace is getting better. Every single year he's in the Cup Series. He's getting just more consistent. He's getting better mental consistency. I really think in a couple more years, he's really going to be very strong and a weekly contender because just every season, he just continues to get better. He's contending for wins. And I don't know. I feel like he should be proud of this season. He's going to think about Texas probably the rest of the year and how that was a missed opportunity. And it was. But like he's exceeding everyone's expectations for sure, I believe. And I think next year he's going to blow people's expectations as well. I think he might make it to at least round of 8 next year. I think if they can just keep improving as they have been, I think he'll be doing pretty good in a couple of years.
As you mentioned, Texas, in the post-race interview, Bubba Wallace said right after he got spun by Cindric in the back, he thought of Texas came to mind. And that was the closest he came to getting a win in the playoffs. But the one thing I noticed in that post-race interview, he wasn't hard on himself. He wasn't down on himself. He said this was a great day for the team because traditionally, especially on the road courses, we think of Bubba Wallace, not exactly one of the drivers to come up towards the front, be contending for a top 10 finish. He looked great all weekend long. First practice was fast. Qualifying went well. Stage 1 points, second place. Overall, I feel Bubba Wallace, big improvement this year. He met my expectation, I felt he could easily get out of the round of 16. Round of 8, Texas, that's going to be one that is going to hurt. But the best way to do, go forward, move on, and now just go out there, go for the race wins. You have no pressure. You've done this before at Kansas Speedway last year. Bubba Wallace, I think, has a lot of potential this year, that team. And, of course, if Bubba Wallace was to win a race, depending on what happens with the other playoff drivers, that could help Tyler Reddick, his teammate, because we know that's one driver that's not getting locked into the championship floor.
And now, something with Bubba Wallace is that I think he's in that transitional period from being like he's trying to get better to transitioning into a competitor. Kyle Larson and Chase Elliott be in this transitional period before where they're just struggling to get there. And then when they finally break through, they just start really doing well. I think Bubba Wallace is honestly on, and he just needs to get more consistent. And I think that there's a lot of pit road issues as well as some strategy calls that need to be cleaned up as well over there. But I really think Bubba Wallace is just going to keep getting better. You have to fail before you can get better. We've seen it with drivers before him. We're going to see it with drivers after. And I think Texas, if Texas doesn't happen, he doesn't learn anything from it. So I think next year, again, you're going to really see Bubba Wallace just continue to get better, learning from moments like Texas.
Definitely. And now looking at some developments, one interesting round of 8 development was the owners' point standings. So Chase Elliott and the number 9 advance, and Martin Truex Jr.'s number 19 has been eliminated from the owners' playoffs. So, Joe, Alex, does this highlight the struggle of the 19 since the playoffs?
It does. I mean, one of the big things, looking at Chase Elliott racing hard today, all playoff long, this is going to be valuable prize money for that number 9 team in the Owners' Championship. Chase Elliott gets a win the next round, any point, the 9 team is in the championship for. And I think when you look at the entire product of the season, this shows how good that 9 team was. Without Chase Elliott for those races while he was injured and then being suspended, they had to have substitute drivers. They are still exceeding and beating essentially the 19th team in the postseason, and they were the best of the regular season. I think this really has shown that that 19th team is slipping down. Again, it just made it through. Martin Truex Jr. in the post-race interview say he feels like he's just slipping through each round, making it through. But now in the Owners' Championship, they're done, and I think Martin Truex Jr., his chances of the championship for, I think, are very slim.
Yeah, Truex has just fallen off a cliff since the playoffs started. It's truly bizarre, honestly, because Truex has arguably been right up there with Byron and Hamlin as being the best of the year. Just fell off the cliff, I guess. I don't know any other way to explain that. Just they've been horrible. I mean, I pointed out a few weeks ago that in the round of 16, Truex scored the least amount of points by actually a pretty sizable, and he only advanced because of the regular season championship bonus points that he got, and that's the only reason he advanced again this time. And now we're going into round of 8. I feel like if you want to make the championship 4, 3 drivers are going to win, and Truex isn't one of them. One guy makes it on points. I doubt that it's Martin Truex. He is not getting the finishes that he needs to get in order to make the championship 4. I think he's quite lucky to make it this far, but I mean, it's just kind of embarrassing, really, for Truex, because for a lot of people, he was their champion, and now, honestly, he could have went out in the round of 16, and I feel like a lot of people wouldn't have. So, I mean, that's also why I like our current format with how we reward the regular season championship, because your full season matters. It's not just these 10 races.
As you mentioned, Dad, Martin Truex Jr. starting the round of 8, only 15 points above the cut line. That's the regular season championship bonus. He has gained so little points throughout the postseason that he is essentially, it's almost like it negated any progress, and it's just a regular season championship that's keeping him above the cut line. Without that, he will be looking much worse situation, and I just don't see it working out for that 19 team. I think if they were to win, I almost feel like it'll be an upset just because they've been so poor this postseason.
Yeah.
Now, Joe and Alex, today's race saw plenty of passing, close racing, and the first road course races to have stage cautions. And we also know that this track was specifically designed to push the Cup Series drivers to the limit. So, Alex, starting with you, do you think this was the best road course race in 2023? And how much were stage cautions a factor today?
I wouldn't say this was the best one. I still think that's Chicago, and that was because of rain. And I also liked Indianapolis a bit more. I know that's a controversial opinion. I would much rather we didn't have the stage caution yellows today. I wish we could have just had, the stage points and then no yellow, but, can't have everything. This is the only race that they're not doing that in. But, for the road course, that is. But, I mean, this was an okay race. I didn't hate it by any means. I didn't dislike it. I thought it was okay. But I like the Roval. The Roval is a very unique track, and I'm glad they're keeping it for the schedule next year. I know a lot of people were hoping they'd bring back the second Charlotte Oval race, but I'm glad they're keeping the Roval. It's unique, and I'm excited to see what happens in the future. I really hope that NASCAR can find a solution to make the road course better, because I really think the Roval is a really fun racetrack. It's just you can't really see it right now, and then when they enter the stages, you don't get strategy either. So you just kind of get not a blah race, but just like whatever. I'm gonna forget it. But yeah, I mean, it was an okay race.
I feel it was better than Sonoma, Watkins Glen, even just because that race went on. But this track was just made to just really push all the drivers to the limit. But we saw great pass, and even at one point, Martin Truex Jr. gained positions using the chicane, turn 3 and 4, speedway corners, the final chicane to gain positions. All throughout the track, we do see passes occurring. Yes, like any road course race, they will get spread out. Stage caution, that did add an element where I don't think we would have gotten that caution for it was, I believe, the 78 and the 7 that got together that brought a caution. That was the first non-stage point caution. That messed up Chase Elliott's strategy. Then afterwards, we had a couple of other incidences as we're getting close to the race. But I feel overall it was a pretty solid, I would say, Chicago with you, Alex. The change in conditions with the rain, something brand new. The fact we didn't have stage cautions, and I think that was a better race. I'm hoping NASCAR would consider let this race go without the stage cautions, because I think the strategy of pitting before the stage breaks, I feel is just a bit artificial and almost explicit, because you know you're going to do that or not. It didn't work out for Chase Elliott today with the late caution, stage 2, but I think this racetrack in the Roval format, I think it could produce some good racing overall, and I think more people are going to start thinking, hey, let's just keep it around. Marcus Smith is not going to give it up, and I don't think a lot of fans will want to give it up afterwards.
Right, and now if we look at the new playoff grid, we have William Byron, Martin Truex Jr., Denny Hamlin, and Kyle Larson. However, below the cut line, we have Chris Buescher, Tyler Reddick, Christopher Bell, and Ryan Blaney. So Alex, starting with you, halfway through the playoff field, which 4 are looking like championship 4 contenders to you?
So this is interesting because I think Aaron, Denny Hamlin, Kyle Larson, I think they'll make your Champ 4. But then that 4th spot, I could make an argument for the rest of them. I easily could make an argument for the rest of them. But if I had to pick, I would go with Tyler Reddick. Just consistency is compared to this, but Christopher Bell is really quietly good and just kind of running in the top 10 a lot. Ryan Blaney's really good at these tracks that are coming up. As Chris Buescher, you can't count him out. Look at the season. He has several wins, and no one expected him to even make it in the playoffs in the first place. And then Truex, I mean, he could just slip through and make it through. I don't know. But I think you're going to have Byron for sure. And then that last spot, whoever's the most consistent or can steal a win at one of these 3 races.
I think Byron is going to easily be one of the drivers and just be up towards the front at Las Vegas to get the win. Blaney, he had another week of preparing for that after the Talladega win. That could be another good opportunity. But overall, I'm looking at Byron. I think he's going to get the job done in Vegas. Homestead, that I think is going to be intense because Kyle Larson won there last year. Denny Hamlin has won there before. I mean, Martin Truex has won there before. That could be a great place to rebound. Then Martinsville, that's going to be chaotic. We know it's trickier to pass with this arrow setup for the short tracks. I think it's going to be very important to track position, but it's going to be a lot of beating and banging. I think that one, you don't want to be in a situation like Christopher Bell last year. Christopher Bell, he somehow made it work at the Roval last year, at Martinsville last year. You can't go in there for a second year in a row thinking you're going to be in a must-win situation with Christopher Bell and then go out there and win. I think at the end, I'm looking at Byron. For Homestead, I'm leaning towards Kyle Larson. He won there last year. I think he'll do it. Denny Hamlin, I think points level-wise, he's that good. He can make it in regardless. He could win Martinsville. The 4th one, I am just torn. I mean, it could be somebody like Martin Truex just barely by a single point, or Chris Buescher by a single point. Far. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be very interesting, but I feel good about the 4th seed. That's a toss-up.
Definitely, guys. And now looking ahead, next weekend, we've got the round of 8. 3 races, 4 advances, and at least 1 advance by points. We will be following all of the action up to Phoenix, and 1 championship down to the final 2 weekends, 4 races, the Repco Supercars Championship And Joe, now let's talk about the Bathurst 1000.
The Bathurst 1000, the great race of Australia, and in front of the third highest crowd at Mount Panorama. Big turnout over there. And Bathurst 1000, Triple Eight Racing, they got it. They earned a record 10th Bathurst 1000 win, but it was not easy at all, Kobe, because in front of over 204,069 fans during the 4-day weekend, Shane van Gisbergen, he got the win as what many are anticipating to be his final Bathurst 1000 for the foreseeable future since he's going over to NASCAR next year. But it came at the expense of his teammate, Brock Feeney, heartbreak, and co-driver Jamie Whincup on lap 136 out of the 161, the 88 car, just coming downhill slowly. You could see Brock Feeney, he was just frustrated behind that wheel, just pounding the steering wheel. Just the emotions. We mentioned about the agony of defeat. You were seeing it right there. A broken gear lever took out Brock Feeney out of the race, and he had better fuel numbers than Shane van Gisbergen. Kobe, the emotion we saw from Feeney in the car, we know this is Supercar's biggest race. Have you seen such emotion from a driver knowing they just missed out on winning the biggest race of the year?
Yeah, I've seen that from other drivers in the past, but I haven't seen this type of behavior from Brock Feeney so far in his racing career. We all know Brock to be this calm, collective, young figure who many think is going to be one of the stars in supercars for years to come. But I was very surprised to see how frustrated he was. I think Brock knew there was a chance to do something special at Bathurst in this race, but unfortunately, it just wasn't meant to be for him. And like Alex was saying in the previous segment, sometimes before you win and improve, you have to go through hard situations like this. I don't think it's going to take 20 years of trying and 20 years of frustration for Brock Feeney to win the Bathurst 1000. I think it's going to happen a lot sooner than that, but I really think that Brock is going to learn a lot from this situation. Yeah, him and Jamie Whincup had that speed all weekend long. They were in the catbird seat right there. They were on track to get a podium at worst. But unfortunately, these things happen in racing. It's motorsports. You have things that break and take you out of contention of things that are no fault of his own. Brock Feeney should not hang his head over the result because he had a really great weekend at Mount Panorama. I think is something he should be proud of, and I'm sure he's going to learn from this entire experience this race weekend in the Bathurst 1000.
Now, Kobe, Shane van Gisbergen, another Bathurst 1000 win. He gained points on Brody Kosecki, but not much since Brody finished second place. So overall, looking at the points, only 131 points between the two. We go to the Gold Coast, Surfers Paradise, and Adelaide. 2-race weekend, 4 races, so both races, all in 150 points for the winner, but last place, 25th, 30 points. So 120-point net gain is available. Kobe, Brody Kosecki last year, his worst finish at the Gold Coast was 8th place. Same for Adelaide, too. He finished better than 8th place. So just that one poor finish last year at the Gold Coast where he got an 8th place finish. Now he's coming off his best Bathurst 1000 finish. Do you believe he's playing offense, setting the bar for Shane van Gisbergen to catch up to him? Or is this Shane van Gisbergen and he's trying to play defense, just trying to limit the damage from a fast Shane van Gisbergen?
I think Brody Kosecki needs to keep doing Brody Kosecki things, and that's been Mr. Consistency. We've seen him be extremely consistent throughout the season, and it seems like with Shane van Gisbergen throughout the year, we all know at the beginning of the season he got disqualified, which really hurt him in the point standings. If it wasn't for that disqualification, we'd be talking about a different story right now regarding the championship. And we've seen Triple H show up to the racetrack, and sometimes they have it, sometimes they don't. I know lately they just haven't really had the car in that number 97 Chevrolet Camaro for Shane van Gisbergen to get the job done. And even at the start of this race weekend, a lot of us didn't even think that SVG and Richie Stanaway would be in contention for the win because they had top 10 speed, but it seemed like they didn't have race winning speed. I don't know what happened overnight, but between the top 10 shootout and the race itself, they found something and completely unlocked the setup on this car, and that's why we were able to see Shane van Gisbergen and Richie Stanaway rise to the occasion, but heading to the Gold Coast at Surfers Paradise in Adelaide to close out the season. I think Brody Kostecki's best thing is just going to be continue doing what you're doing, get those podiums, get a few more podium finishes. Maybe Shane van Gisbergen's team will show up to the track as we've seen other points throughout the season and really struggle, or maybe Triple Eight's finally figure something out and they're going to give SVG their very best to make sure that he can go out a champion before he heads to NASCAR next year.
Next year it's going to be something else. And you talk about podium finish. Overall, I got to say this, Kobe, when I was looking at the race today, I was feeling pretty impressed with what Dick Johnson's Racing was doing at the race with Anton De Pasquale, third place finish. And this wasn't just racing third place all day, hanging in there. He led the Ford Brigade, and all of them were gaining positions throughout the race. Jamie Whincup went up 10 places from his starting position to the finish position, essentially Ford taking third place through sixth place. Do you believe this is a sign of progress from the Fords? Because earlier this year, especially beginning of the season, they were nowhere near contention for any wins.
I think it meant James Courtney there, Joe, but it's very interesting looking at how this weekend started off for Ford. I'm sure you saw that joint statement that the Ford teams put out about being very upset with the parity, feeling like they deserve to get a BOP type break from supercars to make them closer to the Chevys. But based on what I saw at Bathurst, it looked like the Fords didn't really need much help at all. It seemed like they were running extremely well, probably not as well, as the AAA and Erebus Motorsport Chevys, but Ford, they were definitely in the ballpark. If something that happened to those leading Chevys, I'm sure the Fords would have been right there to pounce. I think they have a lot to be proud of because the beginning of the year was really tough. They did receive a parity break earlier in the year, so that's something to be happy about. Fortunately, they didn't get it for the great race, but the result at Bathurst, I would be very happy if I was the Blue Oval in Australia because they've really improved this program a lot. And if I'm them, go down to the Gold Coast, Adelaide, we have some more good runs, maybe potentially sneak through and get a victory. I think 2024 is looking up for Ford.
Looking up for Ford, and another driver that has to feel like things are looking up, Richard Stanaway, co-driver for Shane van Gisbergen, and of course the two of them, winner of the 2023 Bathurst 1000, the 31-year-old New Zealander, making his second start of 2023, of course, in these races where you have a co-driver. Last year, he got 11th place in the Bathurst 1000 and really has done very few races compared to 2018 and 2019. How big could this be for Stanaway's career, especially now that he could add to his driving resume, he is a Bathurst 1000 champion?
And on the broadcast of this race, Joe, I believe they shared the stat that Shane van Gisbergen and Richie Stanaway are only the second all Kiwi driver lineup to win the Bathurst 1000, which is really cool. And I think this win is only going to help Richie Stanaway's career in the future. Remember, just a few years ago, his career really crashed and burned. He was so out of motorsports, heart wasn't anymore, and he actually retired from motor racing. And he had no idea what was next, but he just didn't love the sport anymore. And then here he comes out of nowhere last year, and Richie Stanaway reappears. I remember Richie Stanaway when he was a factory driver for Aston Martin racing in the World Endurance Championship. That's how I got to know Richie Stanaway. And I also know he also went to Europe and raced open wheel racing as well. Thought he was going to do some great things over there, but unfortunately it just didn't pan out. He still had a great sports car career in Europe while it lasted, and came back home to Australia. Had a stand in supercars. Didn't really end well. Take that sabbatical, come back, and look where he is now. He's a Bathurst 1000 champion. And Richie actually pointed out during his post race interview to the seats in the grandstand, saying that's where I sat when I was a little boy, dreaming of one day winning the Bathurst 1000, standing on a top step of the podium. And his dream finally came true because he'll forever be known as a champion of the great race. And we all know next year Richie Stanaway is going to be on the Supercars Grid full time and be racing for Penrite Racing, which has shown some really good speed this year. So he definitely won't be going to a bad car at all. I think there's some potential for him to get some great results there. But a very telling comment happened as well during post-race interview with Shane van Gisbergen, talking about Richie and how good of a teammate that he's been. SVG's talking about, leaving Bathurst and how he's really going to miss this race, but said he'll be back someday. after his NASCAR stint is over, and then talked very highly of Ricky Stanaway, saying that maybe this guy should have been in this car instead. I'm not sure if a lot of people really caught that. I just thought it was very interesting that Shane van Gisbergen feels like Ricky Stanaway should have replaced him instead of Will Brown. I'm not sure if SVG meant it that way, but it just speaks volumes to be like, hey, maybe this guy should have been in this car, replacing me instead.
When you have a vote of confidence like that from Shane van Gisbergen, that says a lot, and I think a lot of people are starting to wonder that after the comment in the chat room from Allmendinger, Brock Feeney will win the Bathurst 1000 one day. I have to agree with you. I don't think it's going to take him 20 years of trying and heartbreak. I think he's really knocking on the door with Jamie Whincup right there. He got one of the best to learn from. Great race. And, of course, Supercar Series, 2 more race weekends, and then they'll be done. In the Supercar Series, of course, they're part of Grid Ranking. And, Alex, one of them no longer in contention for the Grid Ranking World Championship.
That's right, Joe. The Grid Ranking, there are 6 drivers that started the weekend with a shot at the Grid Ranking World Championship. Max Verstappen winning from pole for the 14th time, eliminated Shane van Gisbergen. Brody Kostecki, Jorge Martin, and Pecco Bagnaia are in a must-win situation. They can still overtake Verstappen, but must win to score Alex Palou. For Max Verstappen, 2 more Grand Prix wins, and he will be the 2023 Grid Ranking World Champion. So, Isha, Max has 14 poles this year. McLaren looks to be getting closer to him in Red Bull. McLaren contend for some poles rest of the season, perhaps the next race at Circuit of the Americas.
Alex, McLaren could absolutely contend for poles in the next race if Max Verstappen wasn't the man leading the pack. I mean, McLaren has made some incredible improvements in the past few races, right? Everyone knows that. That's obvious from the past few races. However, when we look at Max Verstappen's performances, the only way any driver or any team, whether that's Mercedes or Ferrari or McLaren, can beat Max Verstappen is if he has an extremely unlucky day and his car malfunctions or something like that. Because just looking at today's race alone, there was a point where Max was over 30 seconds ahead of second place Oscar Piastri. So while the second and third place spots might be getting closer and closer, specifically for McLaren, Max, you could say, is getting farther and farther from them either way. Now, if we look at the sprint race from yesterday, you could say that, maybe there's a possibility that Oscar could, get in front of Max. But I think that with yesterday's race, Max knew that it was a sprint race. So he wasn't pushing as hard as he could have pushed if it had been a Grand Prix like he did today. So, I feel like it's obvious, it's evident that in looking at the Grand Prix, Max is always about 20 seconds, 30 seconds ahead of whoever's in second place. So even though McLaren's doing such a great job, I don't really see them being or winning the pole positions until the end of this season, at least.
Yeah, you should have to agree with that. I think we're gonna have to wait till 2024 before we see if McLaren can really start taking the fight to Red Bull. And for everyone who enjoyed that 2021 season of Formula One, I'm sure we all hope that's going to be the case, so Max can actually have a fight on his hand rather than just running away with it just about every single week. And Isha, you mentioned Max being many seconds up the road. I thought it was really funny today when Max was like 22 seconds ahead, and then Red Bull coming to Red Bull like, Max, you need to pick up the pace. I'm like, he's over 20 seconds ahead. Like, how much faster do you really need to go? So I didn't really understand that, but yeah, it's been great to see the progress that McLaren has made throughout the season. Hope it continues over the off season. Hope Ferrari is able to get better, Mercedes as well, so we can have a lot more parity in Formula One. But yeah, I don't think we're going to see McLaren contending for the pole at the Circuit of the Americas or for the rest of the season unless Max Verstappen stays home, as you kind of suggested, Isha.
And now the rest of the grid ranking with 7 race weekends remaining in the season. William Byron has been slowly moving up and is now 12th in the grid ranking. He could potentially get into the top 10. October 27th could be the weekend Max Verstappen wraps up this year's grid ranking. Now, one more race the weekend after that. MotoGP, World Rallycross, Supercars, and F1 will still have to go. Be sure to follow us on gridranking.com and X, which is formerly Twitter, and social media accounts to follow the latest. Next weekend, we have MotoGP the NASCAR Cup Series, and IMSA competition for the Grid Endurance Performance Index. And now let's toss it over to Kobe for one shining moment.
Yeah, IMSA competition next weekend. The Moto Petit Le Mans. Always look forward to that, but unfortunately, it's the end of the sports car racing season. But yeah, time for our grid one shining moment. So Joe, gonna start off with you.
My one shining moment is going to come from the NASCAR Cup Series race at Charlotte Motor Speedway, and that is AJ Allmendinger taking the win. This season has not been that great. A lot of people thought after spending some time in the Xfinity Series, coming back with Kaulig Racing, this team would potentially be into playoffs, have a win. That did not come at all the way they anticipated it would. It just has not come together. This race, he was really tested, restart after restart, with Ty Gibbs looking for his first win, Kyle Busch trying to get a win to survive a playoff run, and then William Byron, probably the favorite for the championship right now, closing in, but then he's put everything together. He pulled ahead, got the win, one of the best celebrations of just pure joy, the raw emotion he was showing that he got a win in the Cup Series again. AJ Allmendinger, what a great effort, and we know there's a particular person we're all thinking about that was definitely smiling, seeing that, thinking about just a wonderful day, and just sometimes seeing a driver like that get the win helps a lot of fans of that driver too, and definitely AJ Allmendinger getting the win is my shining moment.
For my shining moment, I almost always stick with Formula One if it was a Formula One weekend, and it's going to be no different in today's show. So you might be thinking that I might go with Max Verstappen winning the World Championship, but I'm not going to say that because that wasn't really a shining moment. That was more of an obvious moment. So for the shining moment, I'm going to say Oscar Piastri winning yesterday's sprint race and also coming in second today ahead of his teammate Lando Norris. I think that was a really, really amazing thing for McLaren, specifically for Oscar Piastri, considering that he is just a rookie. I think it was an incredible thing to watch.
So my one shining moment, I want to shout out my good friend Nick Herrenberg, who is non-binary, and they became the first openly LGBTQ plus crew chief in the ARCA racing series. They were crew chiefing for driver Daryl Basham in ARCA for Fast Track Racing. So proud of them. They're a good friend of mine. And that's my one shiny moment because that is just a historic moment in my opinion. And I'm very happy for them. Big moment.
Very happy to hear that for your friend as well, Alex. That's so awesome, making history and breaking barriers like that. And my one shining moment, I'm gonna give it to George Russell after what happened on the first lap. You know, getting that contact with Lewis Hamilton. George Russell had to restart there at the tail end of the field, and we know how difficult it is to pass in Formula One these days. And for him to get through the entire field and move all the way up to fourth, just one spot short of the podium, George salvaged what could have been, a not so good day for Mercedes at all. And it just makes me wonder if it wasn't for the contact with Lewis Hamilton, what could have been for George Russell. Could we be talking about a George Russell podium? I don't know if he could have taken the fight to Max Verstappen at all for the win, but certainly a podium would have been on the cards. I thought it was a great recovery drive from George on what was a very, very challenging day for all the drivers physically.
Very challenging day for all the drivers. Comment in the chat room from Kane's Cat Heat 305. Race of the week, FIA Karting World Champion, best race I've ever seen. Those drivers, they are just racing their heart out, trying to get to that next level. Always so much fun to watch. Thank you for bringing that up, Kane's Cat Heat 305. We want to thank everyone for tuning in. Be sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon. Don't miss any of our programs. We have Grid Encore on Monday, tomorrow. Then Grid Tonight, Wednesday. Kobe, everyone talking about the latest news from the motorsports world. Women in Motorsports will be back on the air Friday. Isha, myself, very excited for that program. And then, of course, we do this all over again next Saturday with the pre-race show and then the wrap-up. Calling the show, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew, thank you for investing in the Grid Network. Your investment means a lot to us. Help us stay on the air. We're planning for 2024 to be on more tracks, more trackside coverage. We can't wait to do that. And buy me a coffee, YouTube Super Chat, or the YouTube Thanks. Buy a cup of coffee, especially for our on-air members. and the entire Grid Network team, you could just put in the comment who is going for it, and they'll thank you on the air. Big time group here that just always happy to bring you all the motorsports action. And of course, thank you. We appreciate doing this for you. And for everyone here, Alex, Isha, Kobe, and myself, Joe, thank you for watching today's program. We'll see you next time. Thank you for watching us right here on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and check out some of our other videos, including Life on the Grid, where we interview folks from the motorsports industry. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.